Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video from the Pickles Park Reviews. Like Batman in Batman Begins, I've returned from the monastery in which the League of Shadows inhabit and have now returned to Gotham to fight crime. And when I say I've returned to Gotham, I mean I've returned to the YouTube scene. When I say I've returned to the YouTube scene, I mean it's like in Batman Begins, if Batman returned to Gotham, but was immediately caught up in running Wayne Enterprises and had no time to actually commit to Batman, because unfortunately I'm quite busy at the moment with work, with A-level coursework, looking at universities, so ultimately I probably won't be able to dedicate that much time to videos. And yes, I only made that reference to Batman Begins because I watched it again recently. But yes, I've decided to make a video because obviously there's been some big news, possibly the biggest news that we could ever get regarding Doctor Who. I know many people will say the Doctor is the biggest news that you can get about Doctor Who, who's going to be playing the next Doctor. And that's true to a certain extent, but I think particularly as I've gotten older and looked at the series more closely, I've realised that actually the biggest factor that determines whether an era of Doctor Who is good or bad is the choice of showrunner. Because for me, yes, the actor who plays the Doctor is important, but ultimately a lot of the time what makes or breaks a Doctor isn't always to do with the actor's performance. Of course it is. Most Doctors who are great, that obviously comes down to a lot of the actor's personal performance, but a lot of it's down to characterisation and how that Doctor is, you know, and that's mostly done by the showrunner, and the stories in which that Doctor inhabits, the characters they're surrounded by, that's all done by the showrunner. And I think the tone, the feel, the vibe, the interpretation of the show really can make or break whether the show is going to be good or not. And personally, that's why I think the showrunner is the most important aspect that determines whether Doctor Who is great or not so great. So this was the news that I was anticipating the most. Actor for the Doctor, I'm not really that interested, to be honest with you. They'll probably be good. I wouldn't say we've had a miscast for a Doctor, and ultimately they'll probably cast an unknown that I don't know all too much about anyway, and I'll just have to keep faith. So ultimately, I'm not really all that interested in the casting of the Doctor. I mean, obviously I am, but not to the extent I am with the showrunner. The showrunner is what I am mainly interested in, and the BBC have really just whipped out a curveball in their casting for the showrunner. A curveball or something that was very calculated and we should have all seen coming, depending on your viewpoint. RTD, Russell T Davies, is coming back to not only do the 60th anniversary special, but to become the new showrunner. For those who don't know, although if you're clicking on this video, you most definitely do, Russell T Davies showrun the show from 2005 to 2009 or 10, I guess, for one day of 2010. So 5 to 9. He brought the show back. He was the first showrunner of the revival, and he showrun the series of Christopher Eccleston and then David Tennant as the Doctor. So that's series 1 to 4 and the specials, and he obviously showrun arguably the most popular era, at least for the new series of Doctor Who, which is during David Tennant's reign. And he is now returning to the show as showrunner to take over the helm after Chris Chibnall announced his departure. Now, many people may be thinking, well, surely that's a good thing. He made some great Doctor Who, some very popular Doctor Who. The show's not been great past few years. You're bringing him back, surely that should be great. And on the one hand, yes, it is very good. I saw the news and I had to double take it a second. I had to re-look at my phone and think, what? At first I thought it was from one of those fake official Doctor Who Twitter accounts, you know, the ones who just put kind of shithousery on their timeline pretending that it's real. But no, it wasn't. It was from the official Doctor Who Twitter account. RTD is coming back. This is something I never expected to happen. It really caught me off guard. I was like, what? I just didn't think the BBC would do this. But looking back, it does make sense from a BBC standpoint or why they do this. If you've been looking for the clues these past few series, the more the BBC have tried to make the current series reference and even become at certain points the RTD era, it's kind of obvious that this is going to be the next step. It was either David Tennant coming back as the Doctor in Jodie's final episode to overshadow her, or it's RTD coming back in some capacity, and he's coming back in the biggest capacity he could have come back in. And I'm happy with this for certain reasons. I'm a you know, I like RTD's run of the show. It's not my favourite run of the show, but it's up there. You guys know that I'm more nostalgic for the Smith era than the RTD era. That's only really because the Smith era was the thing that I grew up with live. It was the first parts of Doctor Who that I watched, and the Smith was my first Doctor. That era was my first era, so it's what I grew up with, if that makes sense. Obviously, I still watched the RTD era at a very young age. After Series 6 ended, which was my first series, I went back and watched all of the RTD era, so obviously I still have that nostalgic attachment to it, but it's not quite childhood, pure nostalgia like it is for some people, because I didn't grow up with it. I got into Doctor Who that a little bit later, because I was born in 2004, so I wasn't really old enough to watch the RTD era. You know, by the time I was 7, it was Series 6, and that's why I started watching this show. So I don't have that necessary childhood and attachment to it, a little bit, but not to the extent that other people do. But I do like his era. It's filled with amazing stories. I think RTD really got a good grasp of what the show was, why it worked, what made it tick. Personally, I think he got a really good grasp of what made not only the Doctor tick, but what kind of characters he needs to be surrounded by, what type of plots that can really test the Doctor and make his character very effective, and the adventure's very effective. I think that's great, and one thing that you know for certain with RTD is you're going to get a pretty good series with some pretty good stories in there, and good characterization for the Doctor, excluding the end of time. Because I think my main issue with Chibnall, and it's what's really made me almost become sour to Doctor Who, is that there's no guarantee that it's going to be good. You're going into a series and was expecting it to be bad with no real optimism, and that's really disheartening. It's not a great mindset to be in. So ultimately, one thing I like about having RTD back is that ultimately there's almost a guarantee. I wouldn't say a guarantee, but it's almost a guarantee that it's going to be great. And yeah, RTD's a great showrunner, and he's written some pretty good stuff recently. He wrote Years and Years, and what's that show that Ollie Alexander was in, the one on Channel 4 about the AIDS crisis? What is that called? I cannot remember what that is called, but he won an award for that. He might have won an award for Years and Years also, I'm not entirely sure. Both very critically acclaimed series. I haven't watched either of them, but they're very critically acclaimed. So I think he's wrote some really good things recently. He was a good showrunner of Doctor Who, so on that sense I'm happy for him to be back. But the cynical side of me, and these days I do tend to embrace the cynical side of myself more, which has become my dominant feeling about this, is that I'm not very happy with this decision. Yes, RTD was a great showrunner, he's a great writer, and ultimately there's always a guarantee that you'll get at least something good in this new era. But ultimately, for me personally, it feels so calculated to me by the BBC. It feels like you're looking at it and you can really see the wheels turning in the minds of the execs at the BBC, thinking we want Doctor Who to get those viewing figures. When did it last get those viewing figures? When RTD was in charge. So rather than make an effort to try and bring Doctor Who back to that greatness in quality, we're just gonna do the easy way and just bring the guy who made it back. Yeah, it feels very calculated by the BBC. It feels as if they care about viewership more than anything, and it really feels just so soulless to me. It really does. It really feels like this is such a calculated decision by the BBC. And as I said, we should have known this was coming. The amount of RTD references and callbacks, characters returning, and literal plot points in the Chibnall era, you know, we really should have seen it coming that the BBC were purely going for RTD nostalgia. Time Lord Victorious as well, the new Doctor Who console game, which has the 10th Doctor in it. It's so obvious what they're trying to do, and really we should have all seen this coming. That felt soulless, and this is just a cherry on the very soulless cake. It's like a cake, and it looks great on the outside, and then you go to cut a slice, and it's completely hollow in the inside, and you're like, what? This is a very weird metaphor. A hollow cake? Like, what? This is a very weird thing I'm just picturing in my head right now. But, yeah, it feels completely soulless. And, yeah, for me, it's just such a lazy appointment. And it really makes me question whether the BBC are the right people to be in charge of this programme. It really maybe has, and I felt a bit sorry for Chris Chibnall actually, because it really does feel that, especially in Series 12, the BBC have massively tampered with his series, because Chris Chibnall said he wanted to bring John Barrowman back. I don't think he did. I really don't think he did. I think that was something mandated by the BBC. I think the RTD callbacks were something mandated by the BBC, because they're constantly trying to get it back to where it was, back to its former glory. But at the end of the day, Doctor Who is a show all about change. It's in its DNA. At the end of the day, if Doctor Who never changed, then the show would have been cancelled long before I was born. Long before my parents were born, in like 1965. Doctor Who needs to change, it needs to evolve, it's part of its DNA, it's what's made it so successful. That's why the show has continued as long as it has, because it doesn't really afford any era or any creative team or any doctor or any characters to become stale, to feel like they've outstayed their welcome. Doctor Who is a show that's always moving, always giving a new interpretation of the show, always giving some other people the new keys to the TARDIS, to the show. And therefore the show is always, quote-unquote, regenerating itself, it's always rejuvenating itself, it's always making it feel fresh. No two eras are the same, and that's why Doctor Who has lasted as long as it does. Doctor Who is a show about change, and Doctor Who is a show that should always be looking forward, and it has always been looking forward. It may be if an era isn't going so great, yeah, that's okay, you just mark it off as something that didn't work so well, and you move on. You don't go back to when it was popular. To me, it's just the BBC just admitting defeat in their own ability to cast a showrunner, their own ability to find someone that they think can make Doctor Who work. It's just them being lazy and going back to what worked before, but that's just going to feel stale. I like the RTD era, and one of the great things about the RTD era is RTD didn't outstay his welcome, but now he's coming back. What's he going to do, another 4 or 5 years of showrunner, 10 years of showrunner? No one has that amount of ideas for good Doctor Who. You know, even as fans, when we make our little fan series that go on for like 10 series, all your best ideas are going to be in the first few series, of course they are, and then by the end, you're just kind of, all the stories you're doing in your fan series by series 10 are just rinse and repeat stories, just trying to pick a monster and making a story around them. You know, you don't have those raw ideas that you do in your first few series. The thing is, it's going to feel stale, and Doctor Who should always be moving forward, and now it's going back, and at the end of the day, no, that's not what Doctor Who is. I was looking forward to a fresh interpretation. Today, I had nothing to do in one of my free periods at sixth form, so I decided to watch The God Complex, because ultimately, BBC iPlayer's on my phone, I don't have Netflix on my phone, so I thought, oh, I'll just watch The God Complex. I haven't watched Doctor Who really in a little while, haven't really been in a Doctor Who mood, but I watched The God Complex, one of my favourite Doctor Who stories, very underrated actually, it's really great. But one thing I certainly noticed about that is a story that would never have been commissioned in the RTD era. It's so weird and just ultimately so bizarre and surreal, and that's one of the elements that makes it so good. But that's not a story that would fit into the RTD era, but it's a story that does fit into Stephen Moffat's Doctor Who, and that's what I mean in the sense that you always need to keep on moving forward. Everyone has their own interpretation of Doctor Who, and that means every few years you're going to get a new flavour, new stories that you wouldn't have got before, new visions, new interpretations. Everyone's got their vision of what Doctor Who should be, and the fact that you always keep it moving means you're always getting new voices, and the show will never feel boring. Then, you know, historically, the viewership of Doctor Who has always gone down when Doctor Who doesn't keep moving, when Doctor Who lingers on itself for too long. Look at the classic series, the main downfall of that is Tom Baker stayed too long. The show got stale, people were done with it, and then in the 80s, the show never really recovered from the fact that Tom Baker stayed too long viewership-wise, because people were done with Doctor Who and they never really wanted to return. And even the small base of viewership that actually came into the 80s that were lost during Tom Baker's era. John Nathan Turner stayed too long. Admittedly, the BBC wouldn't let him leave towards the end, but he stayed too long, and that became stale as well. So the viewership has always been lost when the show has lingered on itself for too long. The Capaldi era, Moffat stayed too long and lost the viewership. He stayed too long, and his era and his ideas and his interpretation of the show grew stale, and that's why he lost viewers. The BBC don't seem to understand that Doctor Who as a show had changed in its DNA. You've got to always keep on moving forward, and to me this decision just seems soulless and almost against what Doctor Who as a show stands for. Doctor Who needs to keep moving forward, finding new voices, and ultimately they just haven't done that. They've done the lazy approach, and ultimately I think I will get sick of RTD, because you can have too much of a good thing. He's a great showrunner, but I don't want to see another 5 years of his show. We know what RTD does. We know that he is a good showrunner, but he also has some things that work in his era, but you were kind of glad that they were left in his era. The overabundance of Earth-based stories, the constant family drama, the Doctor being seen as almost a godlike figure, his preference for very samey finales with no real new good villains. At the end of the day, this is all things that RTD operates in, and it worked in his era, but by the time you got to the Smith era, you're like, yeah, I'm glad we're going in a different direction now. At the end of the day, the RTD era is good for what it is, but ultimately Doctor Who as a show needs a fresh voice. I feel it's one of the reasons why Chibnall era feels so stale, is because he's trying to be too similar to the RTD era, to the fact that he's almost trying to match someone else's interpretation, doesn't go far enough. It just feels like a bland mess of a series. Yeah, I really don't like it. I think it really reveals the curtain of the BBC. The fact that they've probably been meddling in Doctor Who for a while now, and that's no more obvious than this. It feels very much like studio maintenance. And yeah, part of me wants to be glad because I like RTD, I like his Who, but ultimately Doctor Who is a show that needs to keep on moving forward. It constantly needs to be evolving, and at the end of the day, if Doctor Who can't do that, if you're going to be going back and bringing a showrunner back, bringing an era back, erasing the last 2 eras and omitting them defeat and going back, you might as well end the show, in my opinion. Because at the end of the day, Doctor Who is a show that relies on change. At the end of the day, if you're going to deny it that and be going back, the show isn't going to last too long. Yeah, you might get a good series or so, maybe an initial buzz, but personally, it's going to get stale for people pretty quickly, because people like the Tennant era. But at the end of the day, that was the Tennant era. You know, that we're not at that stage anymore. You've just got to be moving forward, bringing in new ideas, rather than just going back. It's a really damning move for the BBC. And personally, I want to be excited, but I just can't, because I'm just a jaded, cynical person. Yeah, I'm a pessimist, and personally this just really screams of desperation for me. It just strikes as such a calculated move by the BBC, thinking this guy wrote some okay stuff, people liked him, people like the Tennant era, or get fans on board, so just bring him in. No, I'm sorry, no. It's such a damning move by the BBC. It really reveals the curtain from their position and what they really think of the show. And personally, it doesn't bode well for the future of Doctor Who if this is all the BBC cares about. Doctor Who is a show with change and its DNA, and if it can't even do that, then what's the point? There we go, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, drop a sub, and hit that notification bell to stay notified for all my latest videos. Sorry if this came off as really negative. I know others are really excited about the news, and some people might say, just be happy for what you're given. You know, you wanted good Doctor Who. RTD probably will bring that. He'll bring Doctor Who that you like. So why are you being still negative about this still? But personally, A, I'm just cynical, and B, personally, this just feels like such a calculated and just damning move for the BBC, and a real negative one, I think, for the future of Doctor Who. That ultimately, you just can't ignore that ultimately, while there are certainly positives to this, a lot of it, and my main take out from this news, is that ultimately this is a really negative decision from the BBC. We'll see how it goes, but personally, yeah, it's not really made me happy, and I think it's really brought the BBC's ownership of Doctor Who into question, if nothing else. But yes, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, drop a sub, and hit that notification bell to stay notified for all my latest videos. If you want to see more Doctor Who content, hit subscribe, as well as content about other things I enjoy as well. But thank you guys for watching, and yeah, put down in the comments what you think about this news. Are you happy RTD is back? Do you not? Do you disagree with what I'm saying? Do you kind of see where I'm coming from? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd be very interested to read your thoughts. But yes, thank you guys for watching, and of course, a goodbye.